Welcome to another episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. I am your host, Graham Hall, joined by my co-host once again, Zach Goodall. And we are midway through fall camp here in Gainesville. It's an exciting time, absolutely. If you remember, our last couple episodes, we've talked about the health of DJ Lagway. Since then, it has all been promising updates. Media and fans who are members of Florida Victorious were able to watch him throw for the first time in practice on Saturday. That was the only practice session during fall camp that was fully open to the media. There were some caveats, though, some restrictions involved in what we could and could not report after being able to observe the first 24 minutes of stretching, individual drills, routes on air, flex period. We were resigned to the media press box area and were able to simply watch and could not report on what we saw. But we were able to gather a good bit, and a lot of that was that Florida continues to be careful with DJ Lagway. He did not participate beyond that initial 24-minute period. But in the time since, we have some promising news, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But before we get into that, one of the big things that came out this week on Monday was the release of the preseason coaches poll. And some people don't put much stock into it. We always use the AP poll, and understandably so, of course. And then when you get later into the season, the college football playoff poll that gets released really has, I think, a lot more meaning than a lot of people give it, because that's going to be what determines what teams are going to get in here. But I always think the coaches poll is quite interesting because that's basically polling the experts, right? And not to, slight the media here and discredit what we do and what other people do out there. But I think the colleagues' opinion of teams out there really, really matters a lot. And Florida checked in at 17th in the coaches poll. Some people have said, hey, that's impressive for Florida. They're considered a top 25 team. Look at the schedule. That's going to certainly impact it. And some people have said that with DJ Lagway and all the returning starters that Florida has brought back and the pieces that they've added and the weapons at Lagway's disposal, that maybe that's a little bit too low. Zach, I got to get your take, and then I'm going to give mine here. But when you saw Florida 17th in the coaches poll, did you think that was just right or too high, or was it too low in your mind?
I think that's just about right. And I'll start with, I find it kind of funny. Billy Napier, when he was asked about it the other day, a couple of times, made a funny quip. If anyone got to see that press conference, if not, maybe go check it out. But he mentioned that, it's important not to really focus on outsiders' opinions. And I believe in that. I think that's a worthwhile thing to, say as the coach of a team, and you want to eliminate distractions. However, it is my understanding that he votes on this. And if it's not him, obviously, SIDs and people around the coaches help them craft some of these. I know that's a tale as old as time. But that being said, you're right. Like, I think that this is truly like the experts on the matter, the people that are assessing their own teams, assessing teams across the conference, across the FBS for that matter. Their opinion is quite justified in where they rank a lot of these teams a lot of the time. And for Florida being at 17, it's a great start, right? People have, as Billy Napier has said in the past, sometimes that people move a little quick to crown the Gators, memorably after that win over Utah in his first game. And I wouldn't necessarily want to put them much higher because, sure, they're coming off the 4-game win streak last season for that matter. This offseason, they retained a lot of talent. They've seen a lot of development from some of their younger, well-recruited players, guys that they brought in who are well-respected as recruits. So there's a lot of reason to be optimistic that Florida can pick up where it left off last season. Easily the best streak of football under Billy Napier since he got to Gainesville just about 4 years ago. But it's important to remember, it's 4 games. It's also, again, the best streak of football under Napier being a 4-game sample size. I think it's probably a little too early to put them much higher than that because they still have more to prove. They still ended the season 8-5. They still had some very tough losses against better competition on that schedule last year, and they need to come out this year and show another step in their development relative to being able to compete with a Texas, to be able to maybe beat Miami, even Georgia, to hold on and win that game. This year, you would like to see Florida hold on through all 4 quarters. Granted, there were serious circumstances in that game that might have impacted that, such as DJ Lagway going out with his hamstring injury. All that and said and done, it's a good placement. It's one that, as long as they come out and handle their business at the beginning of the season, I would expect them to be able to move up and push maybe even toward the top 10 if they can go in, especially if they can beat Texas right at the beginning of October. I mean, what does that do in the coaches poll? That probably pushes Florida up well into the single digits at that point. But there's still more for them to prove. I think Billy Napier and the players would say the same thing, even with their aspirations to make the college football playoff this year in mind. It's just, I don't think you'd want to have necessarily the rat poison, as Nick Saban and I believe Billy Napier, as a disciple of Saban's, would say, of ranking them too high, and then they come out and maybe not necessarily meet those expectations right out of the gate.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. And, Billy Napier was asked about the coaches poll on Monday, and he pretty much said, hey, it means nothing because we have to go out there and prove it on the field. It could age well, it could age poorly, and Florida has to show that they're a top 25 team. That is absolutely the whole point of it. Is you can validate it or you can prove that you were ranked too highly or too low, but it's still too early to tell. Maybe it'll serve as a little bit of motivation for the program, but I don't really know how much attention they pay to that stuff. And if they're really using the coaches poll as any additional motivation, all the power to them. But I would think that this team is fully motivated with everything at stake. Like you mentioned, the college football playoff aspirations, which Zach wrote about over at Swamp247, that Florida has not shied away from that whatsoever. So maybe they're going to be motivated by not being one of those top 12 teams, when that's the whole goal here, is to be in the mix to make the college football playoff at season's end. We also had a release of another poll, which you can read about on Swamp247, the CBS Sports poll. That's a mix of experts at CBS Sports and our very own 247 Sports writers vote on that as well. And the Gators were ranked notably higher in that poll. They checked in at 12th in that poll, which is a huge jump when you look back at how the Gators finished the year in 247 Sports and CBS Sports poll at the end of the year. They were ranked 35th. So a noticeable jump from where they ended last season. That absolutely speaks to the promise that is in Gainesville, of course. But like I said, a lot of these guys are going to block out the outside noise, which leads me to the second biggest thing that happened this week. That was on Tuesday. I know we're so focused on all of the hype of this upcoming season, but it is cool to look back on how Florida got here, how Billy Napier saved his job in a sense, and how the Gators were able to overcome difficult circumstances. That was the release of the highly anticipated Netflix series, Any Given Saturday. If you haven't watched it, I didn't watch it right away when it first dropped. I didn't watch it until Wednesday night. And it was, I think, cool to see a lot of the behind the scenes type stuff. And they were only able to film 3 games. But a lot of people came out of that with a newfound respect for Graham Mertz, what he was able to do in helping rally Florida, even after his season-ending injury at Tennessee. The biggest complaints that I've seen for Florida fans, even though they got their own episode, is that it did focus so much on the difficult circumstances that the Gators were facing last season. And then that 4-game win streak and rallying around DJ. They didn't even mention DJ's injury against Georgia and him overcoming it and working his way back onto the field for that final 4-game stretch. It kind of just seemed to, gloss over what Florida was able to accomplish. And it had an inspiring ending, but a lot of the fun stuff was left out. It was a lot more about the difficult circumstances. Zach, have you had a chance to watch it yet? And if you have, what are your thoughts?
I admittedly haven't, because I don't have a Netflix account.
Man, someone give them access to a Netflix account out there.
I'm slacking, man. I guess that is part of my job. I probably should have watched it. The only thing I saw, and this is just a very small aspect of it, is that I guess they pulled some old press conference B-roll to put in at different points. And they used Billy Napier's introductory press conference from 2021 to fill in a shot when he was talking about the Miami game. And I'm in that. I wasn't covering Florida last year. Netflix did not film me at any point. I've yet to get my check from Netflix for making this little cameo, but you can see me sitting in the crowd there. And I was just kind of baffled when I saw that screenshot, because didn't they have a camera crew that could have gotten B-roll of, any press conference from last year? I don't know. I found that part kind of funny.
Yeah, they were only able to film 3 games. I don't know whether that was due to scheduling conflicts. I mean, trying to cover every team there with several crews must have been a difficult feat whatsoever. But yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting that they had the video with the video from Napier's introductory press conference with the audio from the Miami post-game press conference over it. I thought that was pretty funny editing. Absolutely. And, the University of Florida sent in hours of film to Netflix to use in the documentary series. And, you would have liked to see more of that. I know a lot of people, were saying, and I agree with this, that the whole 2024 season for the Gators could have been a feature-length documentary series just on everything that they had to overcome, the difficult injuries, the difficult schedule, the competition every single week. You kind of never really knew what to expect, but, hopefully we see more of that stuff. But Zach, I also don't blame you for being solely focused on the present right now, which is this upcoming 2025 season. Now, ahead of the upcoming 2025 season, so much of the conversation right now is obviously about competition battles, who Florida is going to end up facing, but it's also about making sure that they stay healthy to reach the ceiling, the lofty goals that we've discussed that this team believes that they have. And unfortunately, outside of DJ Lagway, we've seen a couple of guys go down with various injuries this week. The notable ones from Saturday, which again, we couldn't really report on at the time due to the regulations and guidelines set out in us watching Saturday's practice, but we saw Eugene Wilson and Aiden Mizell, a pair of, young wide receivers, promising guys for Florida, now in their 3rd year in the program. Both of them had to exit practice due to various injuries. The fortunate news is that both of those guys, as of today, we're recording this Friday, August 8th in the morning, ahead of Florida's 9th practice of fall camp. The good news is that both those guys returned to practice on Thursday, yesterday, as full participants. So they missed less than a week. Absolutely, fortunate circumstances for both them, because you never want to see guys go down for an extended period of time. But the most significant news, and I'm going to get your thoughts on this, is the injury to Dallas Wilson. He was not observed in Tuesday's practice session. And then Wednesday, it was reported that Wilson is in a cast currently on his left leg. Could miss a couple weeks, could potentially miss some game time. I've said this time and time again that with a lot of these guys, and no disrespect to the opposition, but the Long Island and the USF game, for any guys who are on the mend or any starters in key positions, they shouldn't be expected to play every single snap in either of those contests, especially the game against Long Island, no offense to the Sharks. So it's not a massive situation for a guy to go down if he's only going to miss a couple of weeks, if he has to miss the Long Island or the USF game before this 10-game stretch that's going to see Florida play 10 Power 4 opponents in as many weeks. So that absolutely is, the fortunate thing. But if this is something that extends beyond the first 2 games of the year, or is something that could lead to him re-aggravating it, I think that there is some potential for concern. Zach, what have you heard on Wilson's injury? And, what are your thoughts about the approach that Florida is taking? I've heard that this cast is precautionary, just to make sure that he, isn't walking on it, isn't aggravating it further. What are your thoughts on him potentially missing the first 2 games? Is that a big deal in your mind, given that he's a freshman, that it would benefit him to get game experience before facing, LSU on the road, Miami, Texas A&M in that first month of the season? Or is this not a big deal given how well he's done since arriving in Gainesville?
Yeah, I've heard similarly. I've heard that it's an ankle issue, although I've yet to get it truly confirmed as to what it is. But it's not been described to me as any sort of like fracture or anything of, legitimate seriousness. It certainly sounds more short term. And like you mentioned, the cast does seem to be a bit more precautionary than necessity. And I go back and forth because we know what Dallas Wilson is, I think, already. Maybe not to the fullest extent, but just the flashes we've seen in the spring game and practice, what we've heard behind the scenes, what you see on his high school film that made him such a coveted recruit. I really believe that this could be an impact player from day one in Florida's offense, or any offense, really, for that matter. I think that he's a college-ready receiver who does a lot of things well for a player of his age. So when you think about it like that, maybe not the biggest deal in the world to miss the Long Island game or USF game. If that's what they truly think is best for him, allows him to get back to 100%, prevents injuries down the line as the schedule gets going. The counterpoint I have is at the end of the day, no matter how talented you are as a freshman, you're a freshman. He's yet to play a college game. I would like to see him maybe come out against, again, no disrespect to Long Island, but at least get a few reps in there to get the, speed of the game down a little bit, hear what it's like playing in a, let's assume 80,000+ crowd, at least for a little bit, get those jitters out of the way. But the bigger point I would go to, he's gotten a lot of offseason work with DJ Lagway behind the scenes. But when you consider Lagway didn't throw during the spring, he's been limited to start, and it took a few days even for him to get down to throwing routes on air with Wilson the other day. They don't have much practice experience together. They're forming chemistry outside of the practice facility largely throughout this offseason. Or I shouldn't say outside of, but outside of an official practice capacity. There's a natural chemistry there that we've talked about before when it comes with Lagway and all of his receivers as he's dealt with his injury concerns this offseason. Well, for Wilson, you certainly, if you're going to be relying on this true freshman to come in and make an impact for your offense, you want him to get as much work in with Lagway as possible. And this is a setback in that stance. I mean, when you pair the two together, it really limits the amount of work they've been able to put in together throughout the offseason, the chemistry that they've been able to develop. So I go both ways, truly. I would understand the approach to take it easy with Wilson. Obviously, same deal with the cast. You'd rather be safe than sorry. But those are the two opponents on the schedule, I think, that you want to have him out there at the same time, making up for the lost time that they've had throughout this offseason to continue developing their chemistry so that by the time Florida faces LSU, Miami, Texas A&M, that they're good to go and on the same page.
Yeah, I agree with that from the game experience and obviously building a rapport and chemistry and getting timing down with DJ Lagway. Fortunately for Florida, the wide receiver position, at least in my opinion, is one of the deepest on the team. Obviously, J. Michael Sturdivant, Eugene Wilson, Aiden Mizell, who we mentioned here, and then also guys like Tank Hawkins, TJ Abrams, and several freshmen who I think are going to now have an extended opportunity if Wilson is to miss those 1 or 2 games before you get into that absolutely brutal gauntlet. Nashawn Montgomery, kind of a little bit slept on right now. It's going to be an opportunity for him to take increased reps, especially in practice. Obviously, Vernell Brown, we've talked a lot about Muiz Tunkara, who was limited for a couple practices, but now he's a full participant. Those guys have opportunities to continue, getting game experience and increased reps in practice. And they also have guys that are coming back that I haven't even mentioned, Khalil Jackson is a guy that tore his ACL last year and missed the majority of the season. And then he had a second procedure on June 20th on his knee. And now he's back working in practice 6 weeks later. We saw him yesterday on Thursday, not in that non-contact jersey, which is a promising sign for him. I think a lot of people have forgotten about him because of the other talent at the position, but he started week 1 last year against Miami. That was a guy that they still feel really strongly about. And if he is back to the level that he was at last year and has, maybe gotten even more explosive, more physical, he's someone that you absolutely can count on, and, a veteran guy also. So I think that it's really interesting, this wide receiver room. They have 2 legacy guys in Khalil and Vernell Brown that, guys on opposite ends of their careers in Gainesville, but 2 guys that I think you're going to have extended opportunities in those first couple weeks of the season. If, again, Dallas Wilson does miss any time here, it'll absolutely be something that we continue to monitor and track over at Swamp247. Hopefully we're going to have one more practice viewing window before fall camp comes to a close here. I believe that we already had 3. I think we're going to have 1, maybe 2 more here in fall camp with 8 of, like I said, the 17 practice sessions in the books. And then they'll turn to week 1 preparation. That's going to begin in the last week of August 23rd. So about 2 weeks from now, we're going to be starting talking a lot more about the Gators getting ready for that first game of the highly anticipated 2025 season. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. A little bit shorter episode here today from us with not a ton to talk about, of course, but it's always an exciting time, never a dull moment here in Gainesville. We are about to go do several interviews as well and talk to some of the guys I mentioned. J. Michael Sturdivant, Jaden Robinson as well, a linebacker that I think is a little bit slept on with everyone talking about Grayson Howard, Miles Graham, Aaron Childs. We're going to be talking to those guys as well, and Caleb Banks and Jake Slaughter, two guys in the trenches there that are considered to be potential first-round picks in the 2026 NFL Draft. So an exciting time in Gainesville, but like I said, that's going to do it for this episode of the Swamp 247 Podcast. For Zach Goodall, I'm Graham Hall, and we'll see you next time.